I have a whole bunch of books that are basically piling up as far as what I've listened to and read, and then the ones that I want to review. I had been listening to this book, Sex at Dawn, which draws a lot of connections to the dawn of everything, which it also fills the gap with the dawn of everything. A lot of the stuff that the dawn of everything didn't touch. Challenging common beliefs about the evolution of family structures, monogamy, and the cis heteronormative relationships that have built our modern world, at least in the West. And they argue in the book that many of these things that we've been told about the development of these, what we seem as norms, are not accurate. They're debunking these myths around the origins of these concepts and presenting examples that show humans historically have been highly sexual and polyamorous going back to ancient times. Monogamy is basically said to have emerged with private property, followed by colonialism and capitalism, which were accelerated by its establishment. And in the grand scheme of human history and evolution, social evolution, monogamy and colonialism developed almost simultaneously, and one influencing the other. Even though there were centuries between their full emergence, they were interconnected because each concept fulfills specific societal needs for the next one. Colonialism needs this certain type of family dynamic, this certain type of social structure to be able to go full bore into the accelerated capitalist framework. And so monogamy really began to solidify as society moved away from communal living with the rise of agriculture. And this marks the emergence of social structures that would later influence Roman law. And in earlier hunter-gatherer societies, women played an equal role. However, over time, women became regarded as property, akin to something that a man would own, like a servant. And this change is what led to the perception of women as subordinate in marriage. And that's rooted, again, in ancient Roman law. And in this shift is where we see the patriarchy rise and becomes a tool for consolidating power. Monogamous relationships became a means of demonstrating value and controlling familial lineage, especially for royalty, and then the lesser classes are mimicking the same thing that the royalty does. And for example, a king would marry off their youngest daughter to another ruler to form alliances and secure political power. And these unions helped strengthen dynasties and keep power concentrated in specific classes. The rise of the patriarchy paralleled the growth of monarchy, both of which served to uphold these types of social hierarchies. And in Europe, where land was limited, settled agriculture intensified the competition of resources, and monogamy and marriage were used as instruments to structure empires. It was all reinforced and ordained by the church. And these values and practices were carried to the New World, to Turtle Island, through colonialism, which imposed a restrictive cultural framework on what was then very diverse society. And colonialism erased that. Colonialism erased the rich diversity in gender and identity that were on Turtle Island. The colonizers imposed this binary framework of men and women and assimilated or forcibly suppressed any non-conforming identity. A great example of this that I always bring up is the term birdash, which is a derogatory Italian word for the passive partner in homosexual relations, which they use to classify people who didn't fit their narrow definition of gender. Indigenous people with diverse gender identities were forced into these rigid categories, leading to the loss of cultural practices that celebrated and valued gender diversity. And in the book, The Sex at Dawn, the authors discuss these topics in depth. And I don't want to give too much away because I'll be reviewing the book in full later, but they build on the ideas that are explored, but not not explored in the way that I was hoping in The Dawn of Everything. What's intriguing here is how they delve into the evolution of our social interactions over time. In The Dawn of Everything, the discussions were sometimes too general to apply practically. But in this book, Sex at Dawn, it gives a more concrete understanding of the historical development of social relations, right? And the book highlights how like shifting to monogamy coincided with the rise of agriculture and private property. And with scarcity and competition, monogamous relationships became a means of ensuring security and attachment, ultimately leading to highly individualized partnerships that separated people from their communities. And relationships were confined to private spaces and often were hidden from the view of the public. And another book that I'm going to review on this stream down the road will be The Myth of Normal by Gabor Mate, discusses how our psychological evolution affects attachment and why we choose monogamy when faced with scarcity. And this individualization of relationships leads to people internalizing their identities through their relationships, through marriage, whether happy or tumultuous or in denial about their dissatisfaction. And those who are in denial may be more prone to infidelity because they're unable to control that impulse because they can't fully acknowledge their unhappiness. And that's the thing, is that's not normal, right? That is completely normal. Like, our ancestors lived in communal societies where mutual security, comfort, and trust were shared, and they were still paramount. But over time, we moved away from this over time. But in the course of evolution, it's at breakneck speed in the course of our social evolution. And so now we yearn for it because it's embedded in our evolutionary tract, right? And so we've commodified relationships and stripped them of their communal essence. And that leaves us with these deep insecurities and dissatisfactions. And this loss that we feel, this longing, manifests in today's depression and discontent with the rigid, cis heteronormative framework of relationships and the lifelong work that comes with the emotional labor that comes with loveless marriage and the things like that. And so historically, societies, right, valued the eccentricity and what you could say, and I don't like to use this word, but it's the word that would be the best to describe as promiscuity, because that's how we express ourselves. And many indigenous cultures thrived in communal settings where conflict was resolved harmoniously because our needs were met. They didn't live excessively, but focused on just having what they need. And we strayed from these roots. And today's issues are a reflection of trying to adapt to a social structure that doesn't fit our evolutionary design, right? Or evolutionary tract. And we have only recently begun to define things by their value, like outside of the essence of our humanity. This value is not, it's a made up thing. And we've only recently begun to define things by this value and by what we can exchange things for. And this shift has separated us from the natural essence of what makes us human or species being. And that's all that has gone all the way up to the way that we treat each other. That is marriage and monogamy, and how those things have become social constructs that emphasize hyper individualized relationships and intimacy, which leaves us confused about who we really are, because there's still that echo of that longing inside of us that is the way that we have always behaved up until very recently. And the thing, the colonial administrators knew this, and they sought to eliminate that diversity among indigenous culture because it wouldn't align with their rigid binary framework that they were trying to impose. And this process tied to colonization, it tied it to the patriarchy and the binary gender system, because these structures uphold social hierarchy. Because people are assigned roles based on their bodies, essentially then reduces them to commoditized entities. And another book, Transgender Marxism, is just another, just, it covers exactly what I just said. People assigned roles based on their bodies, which reduces them to commodities, right, of social reproduction. And so colonialism follows this pattern similarly, right, with early capitalism. As European nations expand, they impose their ways of life on other regions throughout the world to ensure sustainable exploitation. And this required changing the local customs to fit this Eurocentric capitalistic need, which this strategy worked because humans tend to act within their own self-interest when put in precarious situation, which that's what capitalism is. Capitalism exploits that exact thing that we do as humans, right? We're stuck in it. And this is not, it is what humans do, but it's not that it's normal. It's that the system has made us have no other choice. And that doesn't mean that it's the natural course. We've fallen into something that has exploited this one aspect of our humanity that is making us not able to get out of it, because it's feeding this urge to only be able to protect ourselves individually, because we're all being clamped down and separated and not being able to connect, right? And again, this is not normal. Indigenous culture on Turtle Island, for example, recognizes this early on with Europeans and criticizes this notion of private property and their social hierarchy. And they viewed European societies as oppressive and seeing them as built on extracting value at the expense of their fellow people, right? And so this isn't a normal society. Indigenous cultures on Turtle Island managed to maintain their way of living for centuries. European settlers brought exploitation and stripped them of their traditions. And it's this loss that causes generational trauma, because the human struggle to adapt to capitalism and its relentless drive for self-interest doesn't jive with people who are not of this European ilk. Despite this, resistance persists, and indigenous communities continue to fight against these forces that undermine their traditions, and that struggle is far from over. Another book, The End of the Myth, provides a valuable insight into demystify this myth of the noble savage and the barren land, and understanding how the indigenous experience, the pre-colonial experience of the resistance against this colonial occupation, and how it all continues right up into this day. So yeah, I've recently rediscovered a fascinating collection of literature that all connect together what in this top tier of reading. The Dawn of Everything, which is like let down, but still very, just sparked a lot of intellectual, just got me thinking in a way that I had not been thinking before. The Myth of Normal it's very much takes that concept from The Dawn of Everything and presents it in a practical way of what does it mean then? And now I feel this section Dawn really, it looks at it in the ways that, in an even more practical way, because we're talking about like intimacy, and the end of the myth really takes that and then folds all the way back, because then you're able to see this is how it's always been. We're waking up to something that there's societies that they've been resisting this decay, and we're waking up to the idea that there's an alternative to this. The thing is that there's always been like, we feel like trapped here, but in reality, like there's always been another way out. It's just that we've convinced ourselves for generations that there isn't, right? And that this is the only way. And so that's the thing, is that these books challenge frameworks, right? They challenge these traditional frameworks that define our society and offer new perspectives on politics and human relationships and other valuable insights to this conversation. Like I said, transgender Marxism, and then another one, Polysecure, which all of these I will be reviewing, because I feel like that is where I get a lot of these thoughts, and I can synthesize them together and put it in a practical, put it together in a sense that, what does this mean then? And I'm getting there as far as what does it mean? We'll get there. So yeah, together with these books, these writings, I feel like it highlights how political systems shape the way we interact with one another. Capitalism has extracted so much meaning from our lives. It reduces the impact of what we individually could do. And in my opinion, our real power, I'm talking about people like me, right? Not everybody, but people like me, people who have the ability to do these types of things and to make, for who has the privilege and the time and things like that. People like us, our real power lies in how we relate to one another and how we are able to form meaningful connections. And that's in the social sphere, but also in the political sphere. This isn't to say that political revolution isn't important, because it is, but we also need to change the way we think about ourselves as social beings and how we relate to each other. And these frameworks that have been imposed on us through colonization have forced us into a framework that supports oppressive structures like the patriarchy and settler colonialism. And it's backed by these myths that are created when we struggle to face the reality. We rationalize these structures instead of understanding them. And they maintain their power over the few. The few maintain their power over the many by convincing us that there is some hidden force that controls our lives, when the truth is that it's right in our grasp. It's just that we can't grasp it unless we acknowledge that it's our own instinct as humans that has put us into this place, because we feel like we're doing good when we do it, because it's literally our only option in those moments, right? And then all of the guilt comes with it, and thus we are in the situation that we are in. And throughout history, there have been these cycles of communal mindsets followed by these, these cycles are shaped by those closest to power, or those who recognize these patterns of oppression and communalization. But the thing is, by mythologizing these patterns, we give them more power and obscure our understanding of them. And these myths become rituals that justify these oppressive structures and the violence behind them, and provides a comforting but false sense of understanding. And so that's the thing, is that we have to break free from these myths. And to do that, it requires demystifying them, challenging the contradictions, and reclaiming our will to build new structures that are better suited to serve us. And understanding this is a vital part of how we will create a society where power isn't hoarded by the few, and everyone has the opportunity to have impact and to thrive. And so I'm not denying that the struggle is worth something, because it obviously is. It's just that some people aren't built for it in the same way that others are, and that certain people have different roles based on their material conditions, what they're willing to lose, and what they're built for, what they're prepared for, because everybody is going to have to play a different role. We can't all do the same thing. And so when we recognize that this is the truth, we understand that it's not just like this superstitious thing, that's this superstitious, like spontaneous thing, like the bat signal. We know, because obviously that is true, but there's more than that, right? And what it is that it's our direct experience that shapes that. And these myths that we tell ourselves is what leads us to relinquish our will, whether it's 9/11 conspiracies or myths about ancient gods like Zeus. All of these myths are used to empower a structure, whether it's an empire, a regime, or a social system. Myths, in the very same light, can also have a positive effect, but only when they're used for moral and just causes. However, in most cases, they lead us to our own self-destruction, because it's not about the method itself, but about how it's being used. And right now, the myths that we're telling ourselves are leading us down a very dangerous path, which gives us false hope. And that false hope tells us that there's truth, and that truth will somehow save us without requiring any type of action. If we just get the truth out to as many people as possible, then it'll just spontaneously occur. But in reality, you can only tell the truth to so many people. It's about doing something about it. And ultimately, talking about change is not enough. Real change happens when we act. And I'm not one to talk, right? Because transforming things politically can be hard. I know, right? It's much easier to start with what you have, and what you have is your own life. If you want to live differently, do it. If you want to live in a non-monogamous household, do it. See what happens. Watch the world change. If you feel like you don't align with the role, the gender that you were assigned, embrace your identity, and again, see the world change around you. Because by changing yourself and living authentically, we inspire others, and it creates this ripple effect. We do more changing the world, changing ourselves, than we do convincing others to change the world for us. I'm speaking from a huge place of privilege as someone who's white passing, male passing, living in fucking colonial Canada in Quebec. And I recognize that not everyone has the same freedom as me, right? And the privilege and all of those things. But for those of us who do, why not change the life that you live that's at your grasp? If it's easier, that if you have direct control over that, right? Why subject yourself to a way of living that you don't want to be subjected to? If we want to change the world, what doesn't it make more sense to start with the place that we have the most ability to change, right? Like, it's easier than altering city politics. Raising a child in a new inclusive household, an inclusive community has a bigger impact than going like voting, right? Like the way we nurture and teach people, the people around us, the people who come up after us is what shapes society more profoundly than any type of government ritual, right? And this is why it's important not to dismiss these types of alternative and diverse communities, and whether it's like non-monogamy or polyamory or queer or whatever, right? It's forging a new path, right? The traditional path is outdated and it doesn't work. We know this. Find a group of people that you care about, that you trust, and embrace life in different ways with these people. And this will help shape a more inclusive and empowered society, because we won't be seeking something that we don't have because we were forced to live in a world that we don't want to live in. But that's the thing, is we all have the power to live in the world that we do want to live in. Don't expect it to be one person that can provide it, one thing that can provide it for you, because that's unrealistic. That belief that there's just one person that should fulfill everything is rooted in that lie that helps uphold capitalism and colonialism. And it is that established power structure through the patriarchy, is like you being wedded to someone, literally, is an establishment of a power structure, and of like literally how people dominate over new lands through various advancements in technology and social technology and social norms. Like many of these social institutions, like I said, like marriage, are just perpetuating these frameworks. The gender framework, look at in sports, so much like the colonialism behind sports, and then also in the workforce, like jobs like nursing and stuff like that, or like hard, like manual labor. There's these social roles which were traditionally confined to these strict binaries, right? Which left little room for any type of nuance or individual expression until very recently. So this is a lot to unpack, and my thoughts at this point are somewhat exhausted.